polar bear cub. This was such a fun one for me, and funnily enough, a little bit of a challenge in an unexpected way, right? Because you would think that making something that is all one colour would be simple. But the problem is that the shape is unforgiving when the colour is not doing any of the work. So this is a baby polar bear. But in order for it to convincingly be a baby polar bear and not any other kind of animal, it had to be exactly the right shape. It had to have the right size of nose, the right ear size, the right ear position. It had to have some suggestion of movement even when still. I'm not sure I pulled that one off, but I hope I did. It had to have the right sort of hint of a tail. Basically, the accuracy of the proportions was so important because I couldn't rely on the pattern to give you a hint as to what the animal was. Now, I decided to go with caricature eyes, and it was for a couple of reasons. Firstly, for reasons best known to my brain, it was really important to me that this was a polar bear cub and not a polar bear. I think again it came down to sort of body shape. So I've got this exaggeratedly large head and really, really big eyes. And big eyes and a big head is a fairly foolproof way of making something look more juvenile, particularly among mammals. And so once I got those really big eyes in there, I then had to make allowances for that in the positioning and styling of other things as well. But I'm pretty happy with how this has turned out. When I finished it off, I hadn't put the nose or the little claws on yet. I added them in afterwards. I decided to make the nose again a little bit bigger than perhaps I would have on an adult one to give it that sort of exaggerated, slightly bulbous feature that again hinted more towards being a baby. I didn't want to give it a mouth, so I did this classic little teddy bear line. Again, the suggestion of a mouth underneath there. I gave it 3 little claws on each of its little paws. Obviously, bears have more claws than that. But it's like, if you look at cartoons like Simpsons is a classic example, they have too few fingers, and it's for the same reason. It's because how fine you have to make things then ends up making them look cluttered. And again, because we're going for this babyish kind of look, I just thought 3's a little bit better, isn't it? So it stands up independently, which was important for me for this realism thing. And I've also put the head on a really quite an angle. And what that does, if you look up photos of polar bear cubs, as I have done repeatedly over the last 24 hours whilst I was designing this, you'll see that that is quite a sort of classic position for them to be shot in. And again, it helps shot like a photo, not like a gun. And that again helps to make it more clear which animal it is that we're creating. I spent probably the most time on this pattern positioning the ears. Was really, really important to me that they really gave off the correct animal. So I moved them around an awful lot. They had to be quite set far back on the head, and they had to be off to the side, but not too far off to the side. Again, to produce this sort of accurate look. Essentially what I want from my amigurumi is for them to be instantly recognizable. So for example, if you scrolled on your phone down past thumbnails of suggested videos and you saw this, I would want for you, as you scroll down, so that period of perhaps a second only, for you to know, bang, that's a polar bear. If it's that instantly recognizable but still cute, then I feel like I've done my job. Like, that's what I'm going for. So to work up this polar bear, I used chenille yarn. I have a very mixed history with chenille yarn. I have used a James C. Brett Flutterby yarn for this. Of the ones that I've tried so far, it gives me the least grief. I only had to throw away 1 magic circle, and I didn't use any of the hacks that we looked at in a previous video. I'm pointing to the past, but it's going to be up there. any of the hacks from the previous video. Just to quickly run through those, my favourite ones were, instead of doing a magic circle, do a chain 2 and then work the number of magic circle stitches into the first loop of the chain, or to work your magic circle with a strand of acrylic yarn of a different type, so that you then pull the acrylic yarn instead of the chenille yarn to close the circle, and then you can just snip that off and sew in the loose ends. The reason that chenille yarn gets stuck is because it has a very fine fibre inside with this fluff over the outside. So what you're doing when you're making a magic circle is you are accidentally just tying a knot in a very thin strand, which is then hard to sort of push past the fluff to get it to close. But I am becoming more of a chenille yarn convert. The reason that I used chenille yarn for him, I did have a couple of options. One of them, I'm a really big fan of these like lightly flecked yarn when we're producing animals, because I feel like it gives a more realistic tone to the animal. And I got this one. And as you can see, it's got these little flecks of black yarn in it. Because polar bears are so purely white, unlike some other white animals, after having bought it, I was like, actually, I don't think this is the right yarn for the job. So I set that aside, and I had this white yarn already for the kangaroo that I made last week before last. And I made the Joey. Oh, it's not focused. Hello. I made the Joey entirely in that yarn, so pop it back in its pouch. So I had that on hand. I used a 4mm crochet hook, my favourite crochet hook. Do you have a favourite crochet hook? I have a favourite crochet hook. I'm going to show it to you. This is my favourite crochet hook. It's not going to focus on it. I'll do a B-roll focus. This is my favourite crochet hook. It has an ergonomic grip, but the ergonomic grip is not too thick. So I come into conflict with ergonomic grips because I want them to be slightly softer than the metal and slightly wider to hold, but I don't like them when they're too wide. And I think it's because I hold my crochet hook like I hold a pen, which is with lots and lots of my fingers. So it's the smaller side for you. So you don't have to make this guy up in chenille yarn. I actually think he'd look just as perfectly fabulous in a wool blend or even an acrylic yarn. So give that a go if you want to. I do think if you want it to look like a baby polar bear, big eyes is the way forwards. These are 16mm eyes. The yarn that I used for the nose was just an acrylic yarn that I had scraps of in my basket. And I used 2 strands to sew the nose onto there, and then for his little claw markings I just used 1 strand. And I do the sewing with a tapestry needle for the chenille yarn. I vary in which needles I use, but when working with this fluffy chenille yarn especially, I use one which has a wide eye, because otherwise you get frustrated trying to thread it through. So we don't want that. So there you go. As always, the full free pattern is on the Lucy Kate Crochet website. I'll link to it down below for you, or just stick it in a search engine, Lucy Kate Crochet. Please tell me what you think. Please tell me good things that you think. Hope you enjoy making him. If you do make him, do tag me on Instagram so I can see what you've made. I love to see your creations, or stick it in Ravelry or on my Facebook page. And happy crocheting!